Welcome everyone to the new part of Spiritual Leisure's channel, where I'll be teaching you just a little bit about history every month or so. So, let's start off with a piece of history I actually really enjoy, which is Roman history. But we'll start off the gay part. We'll start off at the very early, just so that way you can get acquainted with it and you can sort of understand why Romans do what they do. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, ancient Rome starts out in the 8th century BC roughly. Ancient Rome grew from a small town on the central Italy's Tiber River into an empire that almost encompasses the entire world. Now, you probably know the empire because that's really easy. You should have learned it in fucking world history class. But the early parts of Rome, or the origins of Rome, is said to have it that Rome was founded by the twins Romulus and Remus, twin sons of Mars, the god of war, left to drown in a basket on the Tiber by a king of the nearby Alba Longa and rescued by a ship. It's fucking gay. It's fucking mythological retardation. I'm sure it was just a bunch of fucking farmers that didn't want to live in another town, so they came over here to this town and they started making what we call Rome. Because the Sons of Mars almost getting aborted, that's fucking retarded. Now, as it continues, it is formed into a republic. The power of the monarchy, two annually elected magistrates called consuls. They also served as commanders in chiefs in the army. These were the guys that were in charge and that were sort of elected. I mean, really, it was just between the nobles. The peasants really didn't have a say in it, but they were elected nonetheless to become higher ups of the empire or republic at that point. So, as time goes on, they begin military actions. One of these being a small war with the Gauls, in which Rome was sacked. Now, after Rome was sacked, they rebounded under the military leadership of the hero Camillus, who eventually gained control of the entire Italian peninsula by 264 BC. Uh, Small little note here, this is where it gets into the part of history you might know about Rome, which is the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars was a series of wars with Carthage, which was a sort of strong city-state up in North Africa, which became a real enemy for Rome around 250 BC. The first two Punic Wars ended with Rome in control of much of the Italian peninsula, most of Sicily, a lot of Spain, and basically the entire western Mediterranean. And later, a third war of around 149 146 BC would end with the destruction of Carthage and the rest of its people sold into slavery. Also, at the same time, the Macedonian king, King Philip V of Macedonia, wanted to go to war with Rome. This ended up in his country becoming another province of Rome under their direct leadership. And it just goes to show you, if you're a filthy fucking Greek, you get your ass kicked left and right. It's not really a good time for Greeks to be alive during this period. Not that any time's a good time to be a Greek, but hey, this part's exponentially worse. Now that I've given a general overview of early Rome, I'd like to go into some of the bits in more detail. So let's start off with one of my favorite parts of early Roman history, the First Punic War. So, the First Punic War takes place in 264 to 241 BCE. It's about 23 years. The war, as you know, is between Carthage and Rome. Carthage starts out as a vastly superior power with a bigger navy, more land, and more men to fight for them. But eventually, Rome, with new naval tactics, new ships, and just general overall better strategies, ends up becoming ruler of the waves by the end of the war. And the war ends in a Roman victory. I don't see fucking how. I'm looking at the map that Carthage controls, and it's just fucking pathetic that they fucking lost. That, God fucking damn it. And keep in mind, a part of this victory was also contributed to the Kingdom of Syracuse, which was a political ally of Rome, which forced Carthaginians and the Carthaginian military to leave the island of Sicily and help Romans secure that part of the war. Now, this war ends with Rome gaining overall control of Sicily except for the Kingdom of Syracuse, and with Carthage and Rome signing a treaty. However, there's still a lot we can talk about the war in general, as in its tactics and its battles, so I'm going to do that. One of its biggest part of the war was the Sicily landing of the Roman army in Manessa and 264 BC. According to Polybius, despite the Carthaginian pre-war naval advantage, the Roman landing was virtually unopposed. Two legions commanded by Appius Calidus Codex disembarked at Messana, where the Mamertines had expelled the Carthaginian garrison commanded by Hanno, no relation to Hanno the Great, whoever the fuck that gay nigger is. Now, after defeating the Syracusan garrison, or Syracusan forces that weren't the political allies of Rome, and after defeating the Carthaginian forces with it, the siege of Messana was broken in a Roman victory. Now, after the siege of Messana, the Romans then in turn went and besieged Syracuse, which wasn't under the political command of its allies. Now, with no Carthaginian help in sight, the Syracusan force decided to make peace with the Romans. According to the terms of peace with Syracuse and Rome, Syracuse would become a Roman ally, pay a somewhat light indemnity of 100 talents of silver to Rome, and perhaps more importantly, agree to help supply the Roman army in Sicily. Now, this is a big thing because now, with supplies in Sicily, Rome has a base of operations of which to attack Carthage and its other territories very easily, and continue a prolonged war with an enemy that would otherwise be rather far away from them. Also give their troops a potential medical base and potential regrouping ground in case they should ever lose, to fortify in, get their heels dug in, and get ready to push back once they have the strength. So for Rome overall, this was a very strategic and very important win for them in the First Punic War. Also, side note, as a result of Syracuse defecting from Carthage control onto the Roman side, many other smaller towns in Sicily began switching over to the Roman military area and become their protectorates, which means that Rome protects them, and in turn they become entities of Rome. Now, this actually hurts the Carthaginians a lot, seeing as how now they're losing more and more ground on a island of which they once controlled, and they once had huge forces there, and they are losing to an enemy of which they have complete advantage over. They have more men, they have more boats, they have more sea control, they have more land control. They shouldn't be losing this bad. So Carthaginian morale really drops in the First Punic War after the multiple sieges of Sicily. Now, keep in mind, this army that the Carthaginians had on the Sicilian peninsula wasn't destroyed and had returned to its fortified points on the island. Not to mention that during this entire time, the Carthaginians were also rallying a force hugely comprised of mercenaries. Let's see here. The historian Philonius said that this army was composed of 50,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 60 elephants, partly composed of Liguarians, Celts, and Iberians. So this was a rather huge force, and their tactic was going to be that the Carthaginian part of the army, the actual, bread and butter, their own forces, would control strong points and fortresses, what they had left throughout Sicily, and stay there fortified, waiting for Romans to attack. Meanwhile, the mercenary army would attack Rome out in the open and weaken them down, so that way when they sieged the cities, if they ever got there, they would be severely depleted in forces and also low on morale, which would be a huge boost to the Carthaginian defenders. Now, with all of this in mind, we move on to the battle at Argentum, or rather the siege at Agrigentum. I'm just gonna call it Argentum because that's easier. Fuck you and your gay ass Carthaginian names, and your fucking Sicilian names. I'm not gonna get them right. I'm not fucking Sicilian. I don't fucking eat pasta all day and act like a fucking faggot waiting to go to the gay orgy bathhouse on the other side of the street. Nah, I'm not a fucking gay. So I'll call whatever the fuck I want. And I'm calling it, you know what? I'm calling it the city of assholes. The city of assholes was besieged by Rome in 262 BC by a total of 4 Roman legions. Now, this, in case you didn't know, a Roman legion generally consisted of 10,000 men. This was the equivalent of 40,000 men besieging a city with defenders at least half their strength. Now, the garrison of Argentum, also known to the Greeks as assholes, managed to call for reinforcements, and Carthaginian relief force commanded by Hanno, no relation to Hanno the Great, whoever the fuck that is, and then they destroyed the Roman supply base at Eborus, which was their sort of short way point between their besieging force and the city of Syracuse. So this actually put a huge dent in Roman military capacity for that battle. Now, with the Romans were now being besieged at this point, in a construction line of contralevation, after a few skirmishes, disease struck the Roman army. However, the supplies in Assholeville were also running low at this point, and both sides saw an open battle preferable to the current situation. Now, the Romans won a clear victory over the Carthaginian relief force, completely shattering them and routing them away. But the asshole city police force, or garrison force, in true asshole fashion, decided not to accept this victory, or accept this defeat, and decided to run and leave the city undefended while their relief force got slaughtered in open field battle. With no real defenses at this point, the city of assholes fell easily to Roman control. The Romans then sacked the place, looted it, and enslaved the entire populace. After the siege at Assholeville, the Romans decide to finally build a actual navy in 261 BC. Now, historians have conflicting ideas on whether how they have their military naval potential. Some say that they stole a lot of Carthaginian vessels like trimes and quadritrimes and used the designs of those to make their own fleet. Others say that they already had experience in naval warfare and used their own designs, and some say that they used designs from their Syracusan ally so that way they could make a more effective fleet. However, all that you need to know is that the Romans finally have a fleet, and this allowed them to match Carthaginians' naval skills and actually have a real war. One of their favorite tactics was using Marines. Marines are ship-to-ship fighting men up until around the, I want to say, 20th century. Then it actually becomes something different. But until then, the Marines were used for naval-to-naval fighting. One such tactic used by the Romans was, instead of trying to outrange and battering ram enemy ships, they would heavily rely on boarding the enemy capital ship and decapitating the admiral in charge, destroying morale of Carthaginians. And they were just superior at the whole naval marine type warfare, because a hoplite formation, which the Carthaginians like to do, which is essentially just you lock your shields together in a giant wall and you point your spears out, doesn't really work on a ship since you're always constantly shifting and you don't really have a clear foot setting and there's no real way you'll know where the Romans are coming from. However, the Romans were equipped for one-on-one close fighting combat with their gladiuses and whatnot. They were ready for this kind of warfare, and therefore usually always won a boarding to boarding action between Carthaginian ships and Roman ships. So this now gave them a fighting chance at sea and at land. Now, it should be mentioned that one of the other things that helped them siege enemy ships so effectively, or board them so effectively, was the invention of a boarding ram. Essentially, a plank of wood that would attach to the enemy ship and then would allow them to easily walk over to the enemy ship instead of having to jump or leap onto the enemy ship and almost drown. Now, you might almost drown with the boarding plank, but at least now it's a tiny bit safer. Now, this invention would prove its worth at the Battle of Malay, which would be the first Roman naval victory and would continue to do so, especially in the huge Battle of Cape Economus. The addition of the Corvus forced, which is the name of the boarding plank, would force Carthage to review its military tactics, and since the city had difficulty in doing so, Rome now had the naval advantage. The Roman fleet, under the command of Gallius Duilius, engaged the Carthaginians under General Hannibal Gisco off northern Malay in 260 BC. Polybius states that the Carthaginians had 130 ships, but that does not in fact give an exact figure for the Roman ships. The loss of 17 ships at the Liparia Islands from a starting total of 120 ships suggests that Rome had 103 ships remaining. However, it is possible the number was greater thanks to captured ships and the assistance of Roman allies. The Carthaginians anticipated victory due to their superior experience at sea. The Corvii were very successful and helped the Romans seize the first 30 Carthaginian ships that were close enough. In order to avoid the Corvii, the Carthaginians were forced to navigate around them and approach the Romans from behind or off from the side. The Corvus was usually still able to pivot and grapple most oncoming ships. After an additional 20 Carthaginian ships had been hooked and lost to Romans, Hannibal Gisco retreated with his surviving ships, leaving Duilius with a clear victory. And here's another piece of history that proves that North Africans, especially the ones from Carthage, are huge pussies. Now, after the rout of Mr. Hannibal and his massive fleet, instead of chasing them, Duilius sailed to Sicily to relieve the city of Segesta, which had been under siege from Carthaginian infantry commanded by Hamilcar. Modern historians have wondered Duilius's decision not to immediately follow up with another naval attack, but Hannibal Gisco's remaining 80 ships were probably still too strong for Rome to conquer in one battle. Now we go on to the land battle that was taking place while the Battle of Malay sorted itself out. The Roman advance now continued westward from Argentium to relieve the besieged city of Messala in 260 BC, which had sided with Rome and was attacked by Carthaginians for doing so. In the north, the Romans, with their northern sea flank secured by their naval victory at the Battle of Malay, advanced towards Therme, where they were defeated by Carthaginians under the name of Hamilcar, a popular gay name not to be confused with Hannibal Barca's father, with the same name, in 260 BC. The Carthaginians took advantage of this victory by counterattacking in 259 BC and seizing Enna. Hamilcar, or whatever the fuck his gay ass name is, continued south to Camarina and secures Syracusan territory, presumably with the intent to convince Syracuse to rejoin Carthaginian side. Now, after this slight Carthaginian advantage, they would soon be defeated at Enna once more by a recountering Roman military offensive, which would then also capture the city that had been lost to Carthage previously, and Metisotron, or whatever the fuck that fucking Megatron. They would recapture Megatron, which they had attacked twice previously and had failed. Now, at this point, the Romans were moving north along the northern coast to Panormus, but were not able to take the city. This led them, instead of taking the grueling siege warfare that had been common of the war in Sicily, they decided to go for a full invasion of Africa instead, to attack Carthage directly and force them to surrender. Now, Rome, in order to do this, was building a massive fleet of both transport and military ships. A force of 350 Carthaginian ships, the largest one that we've seen since the war started, decided to go and try and stop the process, but they were defeated at Cape Economus. Now, with the Carthaginian naval forces in complete tatters, the Romans were able to use their military might to their complete advantage, using it to do a raid on Carthage and almost besieging the city itself before the Carthaginians sued for peace, ending the First Punic Wars. And this is where we'll stop for today. Uh, it's actually a really interesting part of history, Roman history, but it's also rather boring at some points. But I'll try to stick to the military aspects and the supreme cultural aspects, so that way you're not too bored. Now, I hope I had the strength and courage and fucking non-laziness to actually do a second one of these. If the owner of this channel wants me to do a second one of these, and I hope you all learned something from this. I hope you all got a tiny bit less retarded for listening to this. Have a nice day.